Now, the rest of the day's news, and central banks in the United Kingdom, the United States and the Eurozone have all put up interest rates as they try and bring soaring inflation under control. The Bank of England has raised UK interest rates by half a percentage point to 3.5%, its highest level in 14 years. There's been a matching increase in the Eurozone, with the European Central Bank putting up rates there from 1.5% to 2%. And in the United States, the Federal Reserve has raised its main interest rate again to a range between 4.25 and 4.5%. That's another 0.5% increase. Well, David Blanchflower is a distinguished commentator, former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. David, welcome. Good to see you. The UK Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, said the sooner we grip inflation, the better. Labour's Shadow Chancellor said today's Bank of England rate hike was further evidence the UK government had lost control of the economy. Who's right?
I certainly think they've lost control of the economy. I mean, obviously, we have to look back at 3 or 4 months of craziness and chaos in the UK economy, trustonomics, the collapse of pension funds and mortgage markets. I think what we see here is a classic example of looking in the rearview mirror and not really understanding what's coming. It's quite clear from the data that the UK is in recession, is headed to a really bad recession. That's actually what the Bank of England is forecasting. So for your listeners, the logic has to be, in a recession, which is worsening by the minute, why would you raise rates? Especially as it's clear around the world that inflation has turned, it's tumbling downwards and we're going to deflation. I think the first really big sign of that chaos was that the Bank of England, for the first time, there were 2 dissenters, professors of economics who've written and know about the real world, and they dissented. And I think what you're going to see is that I'll be probably on your program in February and March, watching these central bankers going into reverse gear, cutting interest rates as these economies tank.
Well, look, you've sat around the table. Let me ask you, how hard is it to argue against rate rises, given the current economic pressures?
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, obviously, the story is that there's huge groupthink. As an economist, you sit and look at the world as it sits now and you say, it's really complicated. There's lots and lots of possible things that might happen. And what you have in central banks, all of them think the same thing. We should look back to 2008. Exactly the same thing happened then. September 2008, the worry was inflation's coming. There was no clue that a horrible recession was coming. And in the United States, in September 2008, the central bank still had no clue that the US had been in recession for 9 months. And then all hell broke loose. And I think that's what's coming. Groupthink, they have in their minds something about what happened in 1974, which is another world. And what this is, I think, is a huge error. I would have been voting for rate cuts today because inflation is going to plummet like a stone. To put it technically, the effects that we had from a year ago, a big jump due to oil, a big jump due to COVID, they're dropping out of the calculations. And we've seen that in America this month. Inflation dropped by 0.7, and you're going to see for the next 6 months it's going to drop by 0.7, 0.7. And that's what's coming. So this looks to me to be utter incompetence, groupthink, not understanding labour markets. And in a sense, for listeners, it's sad because here we go again. The Great Recession, where they worried about inflation, where actually that wasn't the issue. The issue was output, well-being, people being able to pay their bills and keep their jobs. And what we've seen here is basically incompetent policymakers making it worse for ordinary people.
You've been very critical. Who specifically do you blame on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee?
Well, I mean, groupthink for a really long time was interesting. I mean, I was on that committee and I was on my own for a very long time, voting 1 against 8. And the Prime Minister called me up one day and said, Danny, just so you understand, I know you always lose 8-1, but really there are only 2 opinions. There's your opinion and their opinion. And I think what you have is this groupthink again. You have these central bankers who don't understand. So give me an example in the UK. Think about around the country, Huddersfield and Burnley and Glasgow and Cardiff and all these places where ordinary people live. All the members of the MPC are basically either bankers or ex-civil servants, and they all live in London. Well, what do they know about the mean streets? What do they know about the problems that ordinary people have going to food banks. So I blame the fact that you have not diversity of thinking, not diversity of background, and they don't understand the problems of ordinary people, and hence why the economy, certainly in the UK, is headed to a devastating winter, strikes and so on, caused because workers have said, enough, I can't pay my bills, I can't heat my house, I can't feed my kids. And so the Bank of England raises rates to make that worse. Brilliant. Not, I don't think.
As you offered, we'll certainly have you back on the programme in January and
Thank
February.
you.
For the moment, David Blanchflower, thank you.